Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is a groundbreaking series that dives into the lives of people living in the last frontier. Each episode introduces you to colorful characters from around the state. Funding for Indie Alaska is provided in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company. Catch the latest episodes at alaskapublic.org.
The National Weather Service.
Good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 27th of October. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information, and you can do that easily online at arh.noaa.gov or weather.gov/Alaska. The weather info line's always open at 800-472-0391, and you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube during the day. If you're looking on Twitter, you'll get a lot of information from all three of our weather forecast offices here in Alaska, whether that's from NWS Juneau or NWS Anchorage or NWS Fairbanks, or our complete statewide account, which is NWS Alaska. And you can look for any of those easily by looking for the hashtag AKwx, which of course is short for Alaska Weather. On Facebook, our account is NWS Alaska, and if you're looking there, you'll see some interesting climate information today about the impact of incoming solar radiation, also known as sunlight, in your backyard, and how that affects our temperatures here in Alaska, and specifically around the Anchorage area. So be sure and check that out if you haven't recently, or again, give us a call on that weather info line just to check your forecast fairly quickly. A small stream flood advisory is posted for the Kodiak area, and that'll go through tomorrow morning, about 11:15 there. We had some weather reports of heavy rain causing flooding of small streams and other low-lying areas around the Sargent Creek and Bell Flats region. That was where some of the flooding seemed to be occurring. Heavy rain continues to press into the region, and it looks like some of that will start to improve as we get into the morning hours, late morning hours that is tomorrow, around the eastern end of Kodiak Island. So watch for that, and remember your flood safety rules, no matter if you're on Kodiak or anywhere else. Turn around, don't drown. Never cross a flooded roadway, and when you see water over the roadway, if you can't see the bottom of the road, that's usually a good sign that the bottom of the road might not even be there. So remember, turn around, don't drown. Good flood safety rule to follow, and you know what? The kids are really good at helping mom and dad and grandma and grandpa remember that when they teach it in school, and they're really good to help you drive a little bit from the back seat. But when you hear turn around, don't drown from the back seat, pay attention to that one. It could save your life. Here's a look out on the Bering Sea now, and if you can track the circulation here, we've got low pressure and a cold area of clouds moving eastward, but an awful lot of dry air south of that. The main weather pattern is generally to our south right now. We've got some colder influences trying to work in from the north and west, and you'll see that on the jet stream map here in just a few minutes. And looking at 30,000 feet always helps to kind of clear up the weather pattern over Alaska at this point. But we've got several circulations. One of those is driving the overall flow off of the continent, and you can see the clouds moving through the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta out into sea and then wrapping back around into the overall low pressure circulation across the North Pacific right there. A little bit closer to home across Alaska. Southeast actually had a fairly nice day today. Temperatures were in the 40s and 50s, not too many stations reporting not a whole lot of rain, so a fairly nice day there, but there is moisture slowly creeping your way. Of course, it wouldn't be a normal day in October if there wasn't rain on the way for Southeast, and there is, and a lot of that right now is still running through Kodiak and coastal areas of South Central. It's been a fairly dry day really for most parts of Alaska, a little bit breezy across the central and western Aleutians, and many across the Arctic coast have seen patchy cloud cover throughout the day. There have been a few areas of snow across the North Slope throughout the afternoon, and you can see a pretty stark contrast from some of those higher moisture producing clouds just north of the Yukon Valley and southward to some of the lower colder clouds sitting across the North Slope and the central and western Brooks Range into Kotzebue Sound. So here's the weather picture as of this afternoon. A stationary boundary sitting across the Alaska Range and into southwestern Alaska. Low pressure sitting across the western Gulf at 980 millibars, and a little bit further west is a stronger core of low pressure at 976 millibars. all of this is going to combine in time and slowly work its way eastward. But right now it's a little bit on the disorganized side, with the main focus being the water that's hitting Kodiak Island and parts of the Alaska Peninsula. The winds are going to be a little tighter across the northern part of the Gulf. You can see that pressure pattern is just a little bit stronger across the eastern and northern Gulf right now. And more than not, most places across south central, Prince William Sound, and southeast are seeing clouds rather than any precipitation at this point. As we get into tonight, low pressure is going to work northward just to the west of Kodiak Island and sitting right across the Alaska Peninsula. That's expected to deepen to about 978 millibars as those centers combine. So the eastern center will drop, the southern center will increase just a little bit more. But the thing you should focus on is the waves of low pressure slowly working north and east. There may be more clouds and a chance for some light rainfall across southeast. That doesn't look terribly significant at this time. The main forecast for areas around Kodiak does include more rain as well as parts of Prince William Sound, and we could see some light rainfall and sprinkles around south central, including Anchorage, Kenai, and then up into the Matanuska and Susitna Valleys. Southwest is looking at some light rain, and snow showers are expected across the central and upper parts of the Yukon Valley, as well as the North Slope and around Kaktovik and west, and into the areas across the North Slope, generally the western Arctic slope, as well as areas closer to the Kotzebue Sound from Kivalina and Red Dog Mine and eastward. Low pressure is keeping air moving off the continent, so this is going to be a little bit cooler and drier initially, but as that runs into places like the Pribilof Islands and St. Matthew and Nunivak Island, you'll probably see some passing rain and snow showers there, and that may keep some isolated areas of fog across the central and northern coastlines of the Aleutians as we go ahead through tonight and into early tomorrow morning. For Wednesday, we get our double barrel circulation back here across parts of the Kodiak Island. We see the pressure centers now at 985 millibars. A 982 millibar low across the central parts of the Alaska Peninsula, and each one of those again is kind of controlling another wave of low pressure that's rotating around in a counterclockwise fashion. As it moves closer to southeast, we'll see clouds and rainfall, most of that again fairly light. Another wave will slowly work north and east. A little bit further into the interior, snow showers are still possible there, especially for places like Fort Yukon and west toward Ambler and Bettles, and probably looking at some opportunities for fog across the North Slope, especially coastal areas where that ice is filling in. We're seeing more and more ice thicken up across the coast, and then of course that is slowly working its way down the Chukchi Seacoast as well. We'll have an update on that ice edge here in just a little bit. Rain and snow showers just south of Nunivak Island into the YK coastline, where it becomes more rainfall than anything else across Bristol Bay and into Unalaska and Dutch Harbor and westward toward Adak and Atka. High pressure still anchored out west, but that's creeping eastward by Thursday. At 1,018 millibars, it's working toward the Gulf of Anadyr, and that gives us a pretty good northerly flow for all regions. And you'll notice on the marine charts coming up here in a little bit that all of the winds are gradually becoming northerly across the Aleutians as a result of that high pressure's position. Now out across the Gulf, responding in kind is low pressure, deepening to 982 millibars. That's going to stir up the wind a little bit more for places like the Dixon Entrance. Watch for the gusts to come up as we head into Thursday. Those stronger winds are going to be creeping in a little bit from the south, and it looks like right now the best area for heavier rainfall will be just south of the Panhandle toward Haida Gwaii as that moves toward British Columbia. So not all of that heavy rain and wind is going to work into the southern parts of southeast, but the southern area should keep an eye on this. If this changes just a little bit, that'll dramatically change the forecast for places like Ketchikan, Nanette, Craig, and Klawock. Around the Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound, we'll kind of get the backside of this system. We'll get a little bit more of the northerly winds, and chances are clouds, light rain, maybe some sprinkles there for some areas across the Kenai Peninsula, but eastward it would get a better chance of rainfall. A mix of rain and snow showers are possible as you get into the Copper River Valley, and parts of the Alaska Range will be seeing some light snow, but there's a better chance for some light and accumulating snow across the upper Tanana Valley and eastward, and some places there could be looking at as much as an inch as we get into Thursday and probably into Friday as well. Now here's a look at temperatures this afternoon. Like I said, southeast had a pretty fine day. Temps back in the mid to upper 40s from Haines and Skagway down toward Juneau and Sitka at 56, Ketchikan and Craig and Hyder all in the 40s and 50s today. The same goes for Haida Gwaii in the lower 50s, lower 50s I should say. 50 for Yakutat, 55 in Cordova, fairly toasty there, 45 in Valdez with lower 40s for looks like Seward and Homer at 53, 46 in Kenai, and 41 in Anchorage, with Talkeetna at 39 degrees, just a few degrees cooler, in fact, in Fairbanks over the hill. Healy was showing 34, Fort Greely 35, Eagle 40 degrees, and Tok was around 33. Looks like Fort Yukon today made it into the upper 20s, only in the low to mid-teens for parts of AKwx Pass and Arctic Village. Teens and 20s for the Arctic coast with Kaktovik at 22. A little bit cooler at AKwx today at 16 and 11 down the coast toward Point Hope, Point Lay in the lower 20s, and Kivalina as well as Kotzebue also looking at 23 degrees, 30 in Shishmaref, 32 in Nome, 37 for Unalakleet, and Galena had 32 degrees while McGrath was warmer at 38. Bethel had 39, Nunivak Island at 41 degrees, a little bit around Bristol Bay. Temps made it into the 50s for Dillingham, 55 in fact for King Salmon. Upper 40s for most on the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint had 48 with Kodiak just 1 degree warmer even with the rain falling in the region. Again, a flood advisory until tomorrow morning. 50 down the road at AKwx and 45 for St. Paul and St. George today. A little bit warmer for the central Aleutians and 44 out around Shemya. Now, as you look at overnight low temperatures, look for the mildest weather, the warmest, let's say, down around south and west. Now, if you go south of the Yukon Valley, temperatures gradually nudge up above freezing. Once you get into Bristol Bay, they're well into the 40s, lower 40s for the Alaska Peninsula, and low to mid 40s for most of the chain. 44 in Kodiak, temperatures in south central ranging from the mid 30s to nearly 40 degrees along the coast, so fairly mild, and Homer still tonight at 40 degrees. Upper 30s and lower 40s for southeast. The interior, not the case. Looks like most areas there in the teens and 20s, the middle Tanana Valley in the mid 20s. Single digit territory for the AKwx Pass region, Arctic Village, and Barrow looking at 8 degrees. Kotzebue Sound temps in the teens to about 26 around Shishmaref, and Nome you're expecting a low of 24. High temperatures tomorrow back around 33. Looks like Nome and many areas around the Arctic coast will be in the teens and 20s with many around the Norton Sound working up around the freezing point. Mid 40s to Bristol Bay and Cape Newingham, and almost 50 degrees in fact for the Bristol Bay region southward along the Bering Sea coast, and really for Sandpoint and Cold Bay as well. About 50 degrees for Kodiak Island. Some may be a little bit cooler with the rainfall there. Mid to upper 40s for South Central. Another unusually mild day. Upper 40s to about 50 degrees for most of southeast, even with clouds and wetter weather coming your way. St. Paul looking at 43. On to flying weather now. MVFR conditions are expected for most of the Arctic coast, especially for the Beaufort Seacoast, and then south of the Brooks Range summits, and then into the central and eastern Yukon Valley, and then hit and miss along the lower Yukon Valley. Expect IFR generally south of the Pribilof Islands by the afternoon, and from Resurrection Bay southward along the North Gulf Coast through Prince William Sound and all the way around to Cape Alexander and areas around the central and southern parts of the Panhandle. Here's your pass conditions. It looks like AKwx Pass expected to see improving conditions as we go through the afternoon. VFR conditions there, and for Adigan Pass, MVFR to start those, so watch for improvement there in both of those passes tomorrow morning. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should lean over toward MVFR conditions as we go throughout your day, so watch for lowered ceilings and slightly worse visibilities, but it'll probably be the cloud deck more than anything else. Rainy Pass expected to see MVFR by the afternoon. Windy Pass also expected to start at VFR with worsening conditions throughout your day. For Wednesday, MVFR conditions there for Isabel Pass as we go through Wednesday. Mentasta Pass is also expecting to see that visibility drop throughout the day to marginal conditions. And Tanita Pass, more of the same for you, starting out at VFR, so get moving early if you can. And Portage Pass, especially in the eastern entrance, might see IFR around Prince William Sound, but for most of the pass, VFR to MVFR throughout the day, and Chilkoot and White Pass also expected to see MVFR conditions by the afternoon. Freezing levels show that surface freezing line is still dropping south, but not as far south as you might expect for this time of the year. Meanwhile, aloft, the warmer air has built in across southwest and south of the Alaska Range, but working its way up toward Norton Sound. 2, 4, and even 6,000 foot freezing levels there, and 4 to 6,000 foot freezing level across southeast, and 2,000 foot line north of the Pribilofs at this point. Icing potential shows areas above 6,000 feet that could reach occasional moderate across some parts of the Alaska Range especially, and then just north of the Aleutians. Hit and miss, isolated moderate across the Kotzebue Sound region, as well as the eastern Brooks Range and parts of the central and northern areas in southeastern Alaska. Here's a jet stream. This is the map that tells us how all the weather is going to move. And right now we've got that north and westerly influence coming across eastern Asia and then taking a huge dive with very pronounced low pressure across the western Gulf and across the North Pacific. Wind speeds there south are stronger because this is the main road now that the weather is following, so well south of Alaska. And so we just kind of get the tail end of this. We have more of a northeasterly offshore flow over Bristol Bay and a stronger westerly flow zipping across the north slope with southeasterlies just east of the Panhandle. So all of this is kind of keeping the weather kind of out of reach of most of Alaska at the moment. 9,000 feet, we have a southwesterly flow coming into the eastern Gulf. The wind speed's slowing down as they reach into the Panhandle. And then we have our north and easterly flow on the back side of the system with low pressure across the interior and across the eastern chain as well as the Alaska Peninsula. Northeasterlies are a little bit stronger coming off the mainland and heading for the central chain. At 3,000 feet, very similar pattern, a broader easterly flow working across the Beaufort Sea at 10 to 15 knots. Wind speeds across south central about 20 to 25, coming across southwestern Alaska and then across the central and eastern Gulf. Those winds are slowing down, reaching the coast at around 15 knots for most of southeast. So turbulence looks like this. Isolated moderate is possible from the upper Yukon all the way down the valley, really, until you get to the northern parts of the Yukon Delta below 4,000 feet and all the way out toward the western chain. Besides that, you might run into some low-level wind shear and some isolated moderate through the central and southern Cook Inlet region as well as Shelikof Strait. Most of that will be below 6,000 feet if you're going to run into any chop while you're flying. Everything else is pretty much out of reach of southeastern Alaska. That's a look at your aviation forecast. In just a few minutes, I'll be back with a look at the ice edge and the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned. Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service with another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining me today are not just one, but two people, both with the last name Stevens, which is even more fun, but no relation. We have Eric Stevens from GINA and George Stevens, who is a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Awesome. And today you guys brought a really cool toy, or I should say tool, with you. It's a sandbox, but why are you guys working on a sandbox?
Well, it's part of our senior design project, and we were approached by AKwx to build this for them. They had a proof of concept that they developed about a year ago, I think, and they wanted a more robust version that they could pack onto a plane and take places, and it's a handy learning tool for kids and adults.
So you're a mechanical engineering student. You've built a traveling sandbox for the experimental program to stimulate competitive research, EPSCoR, and GINA's facilitated this. But why do we need a traveling sandbox?
Well, the prototype was such a big hit that they decided they wanted another one, actually two, that they could that would be easier to travel with, you know, possibly marketable even.
Okay, so this is a traveling sandbox. It's got a lot of bits and pieces and a computer hooked up to it. What is the computer doing with the sand?
The computer actually uses a Kinect sensor to read the topography of the sand or the shape of the sand, and then the computer translates that into information which it projects using a projector onto the sand showing topographical lines and which is representative of the shape of the sand.
Okay, so this is a live mapping tool?
Yeah. It's interactive. As you're moving your hands through it, it is actively following and changing the lines to fit what you're doing.
That sounds like something I could have in my backyard.
Yep.
It'd be a lot of fun. So you guys had to change the design a little bit to make this more Alaska-fied, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, how'd you do that?
Well, the original was made out of basically lumber and Simpson strong tie type stuff, and we rebuilt it to make it lighter and basically more transportable. We can pack it down to a fairly small size, and it can be loaded onto a plane and flown anywhere in the state. Which
you guys did today. And you have plans to take this in other places of Alaska, right?
Yep, we're actually going to be headed down to Homer with it later today.
Okay, very good. Eric, how does this fit into science learning around Alaska?
Well, you know what? I think it is a tool and it is a toy, and it brings out a smile from an 8-year-old and the smile from a 48-year-old with that inner 8-year-old wanting to get out. The sandbox, it's an interactive learning tool that teaches us how topography in the 3 dimensions is related to, say, a 2-dimensional map. More about that later. Just like George was saying, it's got a Kinect sensor, not just for video games anymore. It can sense out the lay of the land there, feeds that information in the computer. Computer identifies that, sends a signal to a projector to send topographic lines to map over that lumpy ground. So you get a 3-dimensional topo map out of it. my favorite thing about it, this is the thing that stops people at the trade show. They stop at your booth and don't leave, is that you run your hand through that sandbox and it responds in real time. It remaps the topography as you get to be Mr. Tectonic Plate Drifter there. You can make things how you want. Well, what if we made a really high mountain here and a low valley there, and the lines adjust to what you did? It's a learning tool because it shows you that connection between these two-dimensional topo lines and what's really out in Alaska. And Alaska's a place with all kinds of topography. You know, we're from the Great Plains, where topo maps tend to be just like blank pieces of paper, but Alaska is particularly gifted in this regard, and this tool helps us, I think, learn more about our state, really.
Absolutely. And so this is going to enhance STEM learning, the science, technology, engineering, and math in many different locations around Alaska. Then this would be something that kids and teachers can get their hands on.
It sure is. And I mentioned the it's like flypaper at a booth that, or at the Science Potpourri when we had Greg's original version of this sandbox, and that one was made out of scraps of wood, and it was a prototype. But even that one, before it had some of the refinements that George and crew have made for this newer, upscaled, maybe a 2.0 version of the sandbox, even that one was so attractive to people. It just demonstrated that this has potential to be a learning tool, an outreach tool, an education tool that now is portable and can go places in Alaska. Of course, there's only one sandbox, can't be everywhere at once, but hopefully it gets out there, gets the word out about EPSCoR and what science is being done here for Alaskans.
All right, that sounds really interesting, and I can't wait to get my hands in the sand and try this out for myself. We're going to demonstrate this here in our next segment of Alaska Weather Facts, but before we go, we want to remind you that EPSCoR, which is a new acronym for me now, but I'm going to remember this because you can follow them on Facebook and Twitter, and I invite you to do that. Alaska EPSCoR is also something that facilitates science learning at the University of Alaska around the state, and that stands for Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. So check that out and make sure you tune in tomorrow because we're going to have the next version where we actually get our hands in the sand and check out how this works and demonstrates that topography. So for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks a lot, Other Dave. Here's a look at the sea ice edge now from this Dave. And according to our sea ice experts around Alaska, the ice has been thickening up across areas east of Barrow, and we've drawn that greater concentration of sea ice, above 80% here, in white. And you can see that descending along the Chukchi Sea coast and building out now. The warmer sea surface temperatures are still present here around Kotzebue Sound and around the Chukchi Sea, but they are cooling off. And you can see where some of the lower ice concentrations are building in. We've shaded those in lighter blue from about 20 to 80%. So watch for changes here, and anytime you want to get the latest outlook as well as the latest map, you can do that at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice.php. Here's a look at the winds now and the waves for southeastern Alaska. A steady south and easterly flow will work up through the inner waterways there. 25 to 30 knots, 5 to 6 foot seas on the inside, opposing a northeasterly flow across the Lynn Canal with 3 foot seas on a 15-knot wind. Otherwise, south and southeasterly winds as strong as 20 to 30 knots with seas ranging from 13 feet in the south to about 16 feet in the north outside of Yakutat. For Thursday, the winds are really going to pick up. Remember that low pressure system is working north and east, the triple point just to the south, but the pressure gradient is going to pick up throughout the day. The morning winds won't be as bad, but as you get into the afternoon, look for 40-knot winds with 8-foot seas, 30 knots with 6-foot seas a little bit further up the coast, and 15 knots with 3-foot seas still expected there across the northern and southern Lynn Canal. Across the outer coast, winds will come up to 20 to 30 knots with seas ranging from 9 feet in the north to as high as 14 feet outside of the Dixon entrance on Thursday. For south central, easterlies working across the northern Gulf Coast at 25 to 35 knots. Inside of Prince William Sound, 6-foot seas, outside 16-foot seas, and 25 knots from the east and southeast coming into the eastern Kenai Peninsula as well as the Barren Islands, 25 to 35 knots there. But once you get into the Cook Inlet and Shelikof Strait and just west of the islands, winds are coming up from the 25 to 35 knot range, slowing down a little bit inside of Shelikof Strait, and a light and variable wind east of Kodiak Island throughout the day. Look for winds to diminish as we get into Thursday, 10 to 15 knots all areas with seas in the northern and western Gulf ranging from about 8 to 9 feet, 3 feet inside of Prince William Sound, and 3 to 4 feet around Cook Inlet, west of the Barrens and into Shelikof Strait for Thursday. For the Alaska Peninsula, the strongest winds will be inside of Bristol Bay on Wednesday with an easterly wind driving at 25 knots with a 5-foot sea. 5-foot seas further down the coast as well. Light and variable winds south of the peninsula from Castle Cape to Chignik, only 10 knots with 10 to 11-foot seas on the Pacific coast, and diminishing even more on Thursday with a northerly wind coming in at 15 knots in Bristol Bay, 30 knots down the coast, and 20 knots south of Sandpoint, King Cove, and False Pass. For the Aleutians, look for a northerly flow in just about all areas. One exception, south of Unalaska and Nikolsky with a 10-knot wind and 12-foot seas, but winds could be as strong as 40 knots from Adak all the way to Shemya, with seas ranging from about 16 feet around Adak to 21 feet around Attu. That's Wednesday. Here's Thursday. Winds diminish in the west, but you can see the stronger winds kind of shifting eastward just a little bit. 30 to 35 knots on the north and south side of the coast. Look for 12 to 15-foot seas on the Pacific side and 14 to 16-foot seas across the Bering Sea side, with 25 knots around Attu at 12-foot seas, 14-foot seas around Kiska. For Wednesday along the west coast, freezing spray will be an issue just south of the Bering Strait to St. Lawrence Island. Otherwise, 30 to 40-knot winds mainly in the north and central Bering with 8 to 15-foot seas. Northeasterlies coming out of the Kuskokwim Bay will come out of about 30 knots or so with 7-foot seas, 13-foot seas around the Pribilofs, also seeing 30-knot winds. All areas become northerly as we get into Thursday. Freezing spray is still an issue. Some of that could be heavy again. Look for 8 to 10-foot seas across the northern Bering and 8 to 12-foot seas a little bit further south, the higher seas especially around the Pribilofs. And for the Arctic coast, east and northeasterly winds continue. Again, we're not showing sea forecasts anymore because of the ice conditions there as that is closed off. Freezing spray may be an issue for areas west of Barrow with 15 to 25-knot winds and 25-knot winds outside of the Kotzebue Sound, the 7-foot sea expected there. For Thursday, north and easterly winds 10 to 15 knots. Look for 10 to 15 knots for the Chukchi Seacoast, 2 to 4-foot seas there, and 7-foot seas outside of Kotzebue Sound, again on that 25-knot wind with a potential for heavy freezing spray. Tonight's forecast includes a few snow showers for the upper Yukon Valley and parts of the Arctic coast. Low pressures working across areas south and west of Kodiak, and a flood advisory, small stream flood advisory, still posted especially for the eastern end of the island until about 11:15 tomorrow morning. So watch for that, and remember, turn around, don't drown. If there's flooding in your area, please don't drive through it. Southeastern Alaska will gradually see a better chance for some light rainfall, and most of that will stick to the northern and western Gulf Coast with snow showers in the interior. Some of that could pick up as we head into Thursday, leaving a light accumulation. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.